Good afternoon. Are you guys able to hear me okay? Hey, Tim. Okay, awesome. Thank you. All right, thank you for joining today. So the purpose of this Q&A session is to just answer questions that you guys may have and to provide some feedback on your questions. So first of all, welcome, Tim. Please feel free to introduce yourselves if you are here. Love to hear who is joining us today. Hey, Tina, how are you? All right. Okay, please feel free to put your questions in the chat and I will go through them. Hey, Harpreet, good to see you. Hi, Anu, good to see you as well. Okay, so please feel free to send your questions over here. Put your questions in the chat box and I will start answering. All right, so while I'm waiting for questions, there were some questions that have come in previously. I will start with those, and hopefully that will trigger some of your questions, and I will then take it from there. So in terms of the questions that we have received, let me see if I can share my screen. Sorry, we're new to doing this, so I'm still trying to figure it out. It's easier to do it on Zoom. I have more practice with that. So with this one here, just need to figure out if I can share my screen. Okay, so I think so I do have it open here. Let's give it a try. Um, yeah. Okay, so I think it would be better if we just have the Andrea, would you mind typing the questions in the chat for me, please? Because I don't think I could. I don't know how to share it. I'm sure I can, but I don't know how to at this point. So we'll continue on and we'll figure it out for the last time. So Kevin wrote exams on Wednesday, passed with flying colors. Definitely a good course. Onto the residential. Awesome, great job, Kevin. So how was the experience of doing the fundamentals? Was it as difficult as you thought it was going to be, or was it easier than what you thought? Or how was it? And first of all, yes, congratulations, Kevin. Yeah, so Kevin was in our fundamentals classes. We just finished the fundamentals course, and Kevin has written the exam. Kevin has passed, Glenda has passed as well. So great job, you guys. Okay, so it was easier than you thought. Okay, perfect. That is great to hear. Yeah, so it's good that what your preparation is tougher than what the exam is. That's excellent. Good job. Okay, so let's take a look at some questions here. Harpreet, need clarification on Dower Act on joint tenancy where both owners are married with their respective partners, but not to each other. Okay, so generally in the Dower Act, so Dower Act only applies to, so Dower Act and joint tenancy are two different things. So Dower Act only applies if there's only one person on the title, right? So if there's more than one person on the title, then Dower Act does not apply. So that's the first test for the Dower Act. It only applies if there is one person on the title and that person is married. So Dower Act, the whole point of Dower Act is to protect the rights of untitled spouse. That means the person who is not on the title, right? So that's what Dower Act is for. Now, joint tenancy is for when there are when there's more than one person on the title. So let's say there's two people on the title, and generally we see joint tenancy for married couples. So it's the married couples that usually are joint tenants. But that's not like 100% of the time. Sometimes the bank will, so let's say somebody's applying for a mortgage and there's two people who are on the title. The bank will say we want this as joint tenants or something like that, or they may want the tenancy as joint tenants. So generally, if it's not a married couple, the lawyers will not generally do it as joint tenants. It will be tenancy in common. But if they were joint tenants, in that case, Dower Act does not apply. But all the other facts, all characteristics of joint tenancy will apply. That means if there's right of survivorship, if one person passes away, then the other person will get their share. It will not go to that person's spouse. So, for example, let's say two people. So this is to Harpreet's question. So if two people are on the title, but they are married to different people, right? So let's say my friend and I are on the title as joint tenants for a property. So generally, that is not the most common scenario. If my friend and I are buying a property together, then we would be tenants in common. On the title, it will say tenants in common, but there can be scenarios where we are joint tenants. So in that case, if we both are married and we have spouses, in that case, if one of us were to pass away, in that case, the other person, the joint tenant on the property, so other owner of the property, will get the entire share of the property. It will not go to the spouse. And this is why we don't want the friends who are buying property together or partners who are buying property together. They are not spouses. We don't want them as joint tenants, but sometimes the bank may force you or something like that. So in that case, know that the property will not go to the spouse who's not on the title. It will go to the other person who's on the title. So that's something to keep in mind. So Harpreet, does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Okay. All right. So just taking a look here. Question here. So Anu, I will answer your question. What are the materials that helped with exam preparation? So Kevin, please feel free to answer in the chat. Absolutely, it's good to hear from our students and see, what's really helping. But in terms of what I generally say, the things that you want to do prior to, as you're preparing for the exam. So we give you the study guide or the exam prep material. In there, I would suggest going through all the quizzes. That's one. Then make sure you go through the review videos. We have summarized review videos that focus on important concepts that you need to know for the exam. So I would go through that. Then we have this important topic slide deck, right? Make sure you go through that because those are the concepts that you really need to know, right? And they will help you when you're practicing as a real estate agent as well. And then the last one is we have provided you with mock tests, and mock tests are timed mock tests, and they will give you you the experience of actually writing an exam. So they are simulating the exam environment where you will have that time pressure, and you will have the similar feelings. You'll experience the similar feelings as writing the exam. So that's why we have created the mock test. So I would suggest do the mock test as well, and then it will also help you budget your time according to the exam, because there's 145 questions on the fundamentals exam, and when we go to write it, you really literally only have 2 minutes per question. So what I normally suggest is make sure you're budgeting your time properly, and the mock test will help you budget the time. So when you only have two minutes to per question, so what you want to do is, the way to handle that is, look at the question first. Make sure you read the question carefully so you understand exactly what they're asking you. Don't get tricked by extra stuff they may be throwing in the question. Just read the question carefully and see what they're asking for. So after you have done that, then the next step is look at the options and see if you can find the right one. If, let's say, you come across a question you have no idea what's going on, maybe you think it's not from the syllabus, or you don't know, you can't remember what it is. In that case, just skip. Right? You can flag the question for review later, but just skip and move forward, because there may be another question later on in the exam that will answer that question for you, right? So that's one. Or at the very end, you will have time to review the question, so you can go back on to the questions, and then you'll be able to spend time on answering the question. Because what happens is, when you don't know an answer, a lot of times we get stressed, right? So you're stressing out, and in stressing out, you will forget the questions that you do know the answers to, right? The concepts that you do know, you will panic and you will forget that. So I highly recommend that. Don't stress over a question. You read it, spend a minute or so on it. If it feels like you just don't know the answer, um, flag it and move forward. And then, before at the end of the exam, come back and review your questions, and you'll be able to tell which questions you have answered and which you haven't, because at the top of the exam, there will be numbers, and then you can see the ones that you have answered will be in a different color, let's say gray, and the ones that you have not answered will be in dark blue, or vice versa. I forget the colors. But anyway, so that's how they will appear to you. So you're able to then go back to those particular questions, or you're able to review all the questions if you want to. Now, here's the thing. If you are reviewing the questions, all the questions, remember to not change your answers too much, right? So I have also seen students where they will have enough time to review the answers, and then you start second guessing yourself. Don't second guess yourself. Like, go with your first instinct, and if you do feel like you do have a wrong answer, then of course you can change it, and that's the whole purpose of review. But don't start changing all of them, because now you're starting to second guess yourself, right? So those are some of the exam tricks to keep in mind. Okay, let's take a look at some of the questions here. Um, so the question, where can I find the video? So I'm assuming you're talking about the review video. So if you're a student of ours, we do have review videos in our exam prep materials. If you're not a student of ours, we will be offering the exam prep materials as well as a separate purchase if you want to buy it. But we do have review videos that summarize the important things that you need to pay attention to, just concepts that are generally we see, like, they're all, they're just important things that you need to know. Another question here. If you found an issue like mold after you purchase your house, logically, within how much time you would need to inform the seller's agent? So with this one, I actually don't recall right off the top of my mind what the statutory limitation is on that. That would be a good question for the lawyer. I will check with the lawyer and see if I can get back to you guys next time I do this. Um, Andrea, would you mind making a note of that? We'll check on that. But having said that, this is a best question for the lawyer. So in this case, basically now you're starting a legal process. So anytime there are material latent defects that are not disclosed, the way the process would work is the buyers would have to contact their lawyer, and then that lawyer will send a letter to buyer's lawyer, and you are starting the process. So basically, in order to get any sort of remediation of the matter, it will be a lawyer's issue now, and they would go back and forth and see if the issue can be resolved. If the issue cannot be resolved, then you're looking at a lawsuit now. So when we are talking about material latent defects, so it could be mold issue, right? Water issue where there was a leak that was not disclosed, or there's mold in the walls, or property was used as a grow operation, so there's mold, or there was flooding, and that was never reported or disclosed as material latent defects. So in these types of cases, um, material latent defects are required to be disclosed by law. So this is where the seller would have to disclose it to their real estate professional, and the real estate professional would then have to disclose it um, to the general public, or whoever, to the buyer and anybody interested in buying the property. So those disclosures are required. Now, if a person does not disclose it, let's say seller doesn't disclose it to the seller's agent, then they would not be able to disclose it. And this is where the sellers can get sued by the buyers. So, and the court would look at the evidence, and if it was really not disclosed, in that case, there would be a remedy. So there would be monetary damages that the court would award to the buyers. But the process would go through the lawyers at this point, not the real estate professionals. But we need to know, because as real estate professional, let's say the seller says, well, no, I told my agent about the material latent defect, and my agent did not disclose it. So this is where we as real estate professionals could get in trouble. And this is where you need to have notes. You need to have a declaration signed that there's no material latent defects, which is part of our service agreement that we sign with our sellers. So that question has to be asked. We have to explain what material latent defects are to our clients, and we need to make sure that we are able to, like, we are disclosing it, so we are not in trouble. So generally, what happens is the buyer will sue the brokerage, the agent, and the seller. And this is where, when the seller's agent has all the paperwork showing that this question was asked and it was answered and they signed off on it, then the agent and the brokerage are out of the picture, unless they really did some wrongdoing. Then they would be in trouble as well, but otherwise they would be out of the picture, and it would be the seller who would be on the hook for not disclosing that. But we as real estate professionals are required to ask that question and make sure the seller understands that this is a requirement by law. It's required. Okay. Um, yeah, and it's not something to be taken lightly. Sometimes the seller, or the homeowner feels that it's not necessary. So this is where it's not about trying to hide stuff and get the best price possible. Well, you do have to disclose it, and this is where it can really come to bite the person later on. Okay, so let's take a look at another question here. Question was, I'm pursuing mortgage broker course, wrote my exam, but failed in the first attempt, and the exam was totally out of the syllabus. What should I do? So this question is, I'm assuming, not from and that's correct, I think, Andrea. This question is not from our student, but so it's kind of difficult to say what was not in the syllabus. So what I would suggest is, if there are like topics, again, we're not allowed to discuss exam questions and so forth. But if there are topics that you find you have no idea about, I would suggest please join the Q&A sessions here, and I can help you with answering some of those questions. We do have an exam prep, or we will have mock tests, I should say, for the mortgage exam as well, coming out next week. For the fundamentals, we're still working on the second part, second course right now. It will be available in September, but we do have mock tests for the fundamentals of mortgage brokerage course. So that's another option. Or you can come to one of these sessions, or send us your questions ahead of time, any topic that you don't understand, and then I'm happy to help you with that. Okay, so another question here. Oh, question from Dina. Yes, Dina, good point. Okay, any material latent defects that have been remediated do not have to be disclosed. So actually, let me say the question first. So we just talked about how material latent defects have to be disclosed by law. But the second part to that question is, do remedied material latent defects have to be disclosed? And the answer to that is no, we do not have to disclose any material latent defects that have been remedied. So what does that mean? So, for example, let's say somebody had flooding in their basement. It rained a lot, or the snow melted, and the basement flooded. Now, as a result of that, we'll have to do remediation on that. So basically, they would have to rip out the carpet. They will have to make sure it's dry. If there's mold, they will have to fix the mold, and then they would go back and new carpet, new subfloor, whatever needs to be done, new paint. So that's remediation. That's a proper way of doing it and getting it done by a person who is knowledgeable in that area, not DIY stuff if you don't know what you're doing. So in this case, if they have been remedied properly, they have been fixed properly by somebody who knows what they're doing, in that case, those material latent defects do not have to be disclosed because they have been fixed already. So essentially, when we say that material latent defects have to be disclosed, so what we are saying is basically there's an issue with the house, there's a problem that needs to be fixed, and then it will become the buyer's responsibility, and that's why the seller has to disclose that. But let's say there was a mold issue. Let's say the property was used as a grow operation, and as a result of that, there was a mold issue in the house. So in this case, if let's say the seller fixes the problem, which means now remediation for mold can be quite a process. You would have to rip out the drywall. You would have to, redo the insulation, make sure there's no mold, kill up all the mold and so forth. So anything that has a mold on it will need to be removed, and it will have to be fixed. So it's a big process, costly process. So in this case, if the person were to go do all of that, so new insulation, new drywall, new paint, new carpets, new flooring, everything is brand new. All the mold has been removed and fixed. Now, in this case, that would be considered a remedied material latent defect, right? So as long as you fix the problem or remedy the issue, we don't have to disclose it. So now they don't have to disclose it because it's not an active issue, right? So let's say somebody had a crack in the foundation. That's a material latent defect. But if they fix that crack in the foundation properly with somebody or a contractor who knows or deals with foundation issues, that contractor fixed it, then that's a remedied material latent defect. It does not have to be disclosed. But here's the thing, you can't just go hide it. You can't just, put a little bit of cement on it and say, oh, it's fixed now. That is not remedied. That's hiding the problem. And the problem still exists. So that's why we have to disclose that. Okay, condominium document review. Another question here. Oh, sorry. Before we continue on, what kind of proof would you need for remediation? So, in terms of remediation, what you want to see is invoices, right? So, you want to see that who did the work, right? The contractor that did the work, and what work was actually done, documentation on what work was done, and then the invoices being paid that the work was actually done. So now we have proof because tomorrow, let's say similar problem showed up again, and then the buyer said, well, you didn't fix it. the first time. So then we can show proof. No, we actually fixed it, right? So now, if let's say the foundation crack happens in another place, and then we're back to square one, now that's a different issue altogether, right? It's similar, but it's different. So that's why we need to have documentation that we can prove that we can back up and back up our concerns, saying that, like, that the remediation was actually done. So that's the type of proof that we would need. Okay. Do we have to discuss it with the seller, right? So you do want to discuss it with the seller, but we don't necessarily have to disclose it to the buyer. So here's an interesting. So for example, let's say the basement was flooded and it was remedied. So now, should you disclose that to the buyer, right? Now, there's pros and cons to doing that. The seller is not required by law to do that, but there are benefits to disclosing it, because there's benefits and there's disadvantages to disclosing it, because one, the benefit is that the seller appears more honest, because there may be evidence of that remediation being done that the buyer will find. So this way, otherwise they'll think, oh, they're trying to hide something, the seller's trying to hide something, but in reality, seller just fixed the problem, right? So in this case, if you do disclose it, that's a good thing. There can be benefit to that, right? The buyers will say, okay, the seller's honest. They're telling us, what it is and how it is, which is a good thing. Now, the downside is, on the same hand, or on the other hand, the buyers may think that, oh, they may not want to buy the property because now they know there was an issue. So in their mind, they may think, well, maybe tomorrow we will have a similar issue, or the same issue can pop up again, even though it was fixed. So that's something the seller would have to weigh, and we as real estate professionals, we will have to ask the seller how they want to proceed in that. So our job as real estate professionals at that point would be to lay out the pros and cons for the seller and say, okay, you don't by law have to disclose remedied material latent defects, but these are the benefits to disclosing that, and these are the downsides to disclosing that. And now you decide how you would want me to handle the situation. And then whatever our seller then tells us, that's how we would proceed with that. Okay. So, but we have to follow instructions from our seller, because this would be considered lawful instructions. But if our seller says, there are problems, there's material latent defects, there's flooding in the basement, but don't tell anybody, don't tell the buyers that. If it has not been fixed, we have to tell them, right? In that case, if they say, no, 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 don't tell that, we cannot proceed with that transaction, because then that's unlawful instruction, and we cannot follow unlawful instruction from our clients. Lawful instructions, which means they have been remedied, things have been fixed, that we can follow. But if it says they have not been fixed, but don't disclose it so we can sell it for a higher price, that we cannot follow. Okay. So hopefully, Dina, that answers your question. Okay. So another question. Here, any way to flag such property? Unfortunately, there isn't. We cannot tell when something has been remedied unless there is so this is where, as we work as you gain more experience as a real estate professional, there will be telltale signs where you'll be able to tell, okay, maybe there was a issue with, you will see some signs that there may have been issue with it, with the property, but you'll see, like, you can see for the cracks in the foundation, you can see that it has been fixed if it's exposed. So you will start looking for these things, but every house is it's different, right? Every situation is different. So there's no like a checklist as such that we can follow. It's just, as we are showing the properties, we will start paying attention to the foundation, to any sort of stains or anything like that that will show us that there may be a problem. So again, may be a problem, and that's where we as real estate professionals will then get more information about that. So we'll have to ask more questions to the buyer's agent, to the seller's agent, and then seller's agent would go ask the seller, and we can get that answers. But there's really no way to flag the property because we don't really know the history of the property. Even as a real estate professional, even if you were representing the seller, you don't know that particular property, right? Unless, if the property was listed before, then it got removed and, you had shown it to somebody, you knew there were issues, but otherwise there's really no way. Other thing that you could do is you could look at any kind of permits that have been pulled. Actually, that's a good way to to see if things have actually been remedied properly. So let's say there's a mold issue and they were going to do remediation on it. And now this is where the permits would have to be pulled. So that you can do. You can check with the city to see if there are any permits. You can go to the city website and you'll be able to put the property address in and see if there were any permits pulled for that particular property. If it shows that there were permits pulled, then you know that they were doing remediation, right? So that would make sense. That's one way you can tell if the property it has been used as like a drug lab or something, or a grow operation. Then you could check with the police and see if there were any reports in regards to that property. That's another way to do it. But other than that, there's no checklist as such for how we can flag that type of property. Okay. Another question here, Dina, you had asked the question about um, interior walls. That's a good question. Okay, so one of the questions in our mock test. So okay, Dina, we are trying to confuse you with the question, right? So I don't think I have the question in front of me, but the way the question was phrased, so it's how do you measure attached property, right? If it's an attached property, it doesn't matter if it's connected on all four sides or one side or whatever. It doesn't matter. Attached property is an attached property. So that would be condominium, duplex, townhome, any property that is attached to another property, even if it's by garage, even if it's by little bit, it's still an attached property. It's considered an attached property. So in that attached property, so we are in an office condominium here. So in this case, we would measure the property from the interior. So interior perimeter walls. And this is where you have to pay attention to the wording that is used, right? So interior perimeter walls that means you're measuring it from the inside, but the exterior wall. So the wall behind me is an exterior wall, right? Or perimeter wall. So it's the same thing, exterior wall, perimeter wall. It's the same thing. It's just different wording. We just changed the vocabulary. So instead of saying interior perimeter walls, we said from the inside of the exterior walls, right? So you're still measuring the property from the inside, right? But you have to measure it from the exterior wall. So don't confuse that with the exterior, measuring the property from the exterior. We're not measuring it from the exterior. Attached property has to be measured from the inside of the property. So interior perimeter walls, or another way of saying that is from the inside of the exterior wall, right? So you're basically, what we are saying is not an inside wall, not like a room wall. It has to be your exterior wall, right? Building envelope. So Dina, that's where we're trying to confuse you, and the reason for our mock test the way they're structured is because we're trying to give you an experience of how Riga will try to confuse you, right? They may not use the same words because of course these are our words, but it makes you read the question carefully. So don't get thrown off by that. Just take a moment, take a breather, read the question carefully. We just flipped one word in that, and that causes the confusion. And of course, they're not going to give you the exact same thing that you may be reading, because they want to make sure that you are understanding the concept, not just memorizing something. But it's the same thing. Dina, you are right in knowing the concept, and that's part of the challenge sometimes we see students experience. They will know the concept, but sometimes when it comes to answering question on the exam, it get turned around, right? So you know the concept, if it's an attached property, we measure it from the inside. And if it's a detached property, we measure it from the outside. So exterior walls, but from outside. But when it's an attached property, we're measuring from the exterior wall, but from inside, right? So it's perimeter walls. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so if you guys have any other questions, please put it in there. We're just past our time. So if you have any questions, please put them in there. And I think there was another question, condominium document review condition, right? So there are two things to keep in mind here, condominium document review condition. So one is condominium document review. So we can, if you're helping someone purchase a condominium, which could be a townhome, condominium, duplex, whatever. So if it's a condominium, part of a condominium. So in that case, one of the conditions, especially for condominiums, would be condominium document review condition. So in this case, generally it's 10 days. Within 10 days, they would have to provide the condominium documents, and buyer can look at those documents. They can review the documents. Usually, I always recommend my clients to talk to their lawyer and get the feedback from the lawyer, because the lawyer knows will be able to review them and see if there are any issues. Now, within those that time frame, whatever your condition date is prior to that, if the condominium documents have an issue, then the buyer has the right to not waive the condition, right? So they cannot cancel the contract, because if the contract has been written, right? So we have two options. Either we can waive the conditions, which means the contract will proceed, or we can choose not to waive the conditions, in which case the contract will not proceed, right? We're not nulling the contracts. We're not canceling the contracts. We are choosing to either remove conditions or not remove conditions, right? So again, wording, that's it, right? Don't get confused, just the wording, right? It's okay. So that's the so basically, but the way we say it in layman terms is not what the technical word, the technical way of saying it is. So that's the only thing. So don't worry about it. You got it right. Yes, you can technically. The way the buyers will say is, "Oh, I can get out of the contract." Yes, but the technical term is we can choose not to waive the conditions, in which the buyers don't have to buy the property, and the contract is finished. It's completed at that point. Another question here, with the Residential Tenancies Act be included in the fundamentals of real estate exam? Now, in this case, looking at the competencies, RECA did remove the Residential Tenancies Act from the fundamentals of real estate course. It is still in the property management course, and it can be on that exam. But looking at the competencies, it is not in the fundamentals of real estate exam. So I wouldn't focus on it. Having said that, I mean, some of the RECA's exams are not quite updated, but I can't really speak to that. But it's not part of the competencies for the fundamentals of real estate exam. So you don't have to go through the Residential Tenancies Act. Only thing you do need to know is, if you are working with a property, let's say an investor wants you to sell a property and there's a tenant in there. Now, we would have to schedule our showings with the tenants. We will have to give them 24-hour notice in order to show the property. So that type of stuff we still have to do. So that's why you kind of need to know the Residential Tenancies Act from practice perspective. But you don't really need to, like, if you're not renting out the properties, you don't really need to know like deposit rules or things like that. But you do need to know that, as per Residential Tenancies Act, there's a requirement that the owner has to, the landlord has to give the tenant 24-hour notice in order to enter the property. So if you're going to schedule a showings, you have to keep that in mind, and you would have to give them the proper notice, so that there's no trouble. So yeah, from our sales of residential properties, that's what you need to keep in mind. But if you are a property manager, there's a whole thing. You do need to know Residential Tenancies Act, because now you will have to be in compliance with that day in, day out. So you need to know that, but not for the fundamentals of real estate course. Okay, so I think that's it for the questions. Any other questions before we wrap it up here? Okay, so I think that's it. So thank you guys for joining me. Today we are going to continue these Q&A sessions. So whether you're a student of ours or you're not a student of ours, if there's a question that we can answer for you, that could be in regards to the eligibility requirements, or anything else like that. If you need help with anything, we are here to help you. So please don't be shy. send your questions to us. We do ask for questions on different media, so you'll see Instagram posts from us, you'll see Facebook posts, YouTube. So please feel free to send us your questions, and I will make sure that I cover those questions during these Q&A sessions. So we have the Q&A sessions every other Friday. It's usually during the lunch break, so 12 o'clock. So please come join us. Hopefully, you'll get to learn something as you're here. Oh, thank you. And Anu is saying if you're not a student, you should register right away. Thank you, Anu. I really appreciate that. Okay, awesome. Kevin, thank you so much for sending the breakdown. So, with the school here, we are always trying to, find analytics. We are trying to understand where students are struggling, where the problems are, so we can provide more resources to support you in those areas. So that's why we do appreciate anybody sending us the breakdown on sort of how they did on the exam, so then we know where to focus our energy in terms of helping students. So thank you for doing that, Kevin. All right, so we'll wrap it up here. We're going into long weekend. Have a wonderful long weekend. It's supposed to be nice, so enjoy the sunshine while we have it. And then I'll be back again in 2 weeks with another Q&A session. Okay, bye for now.